Excuse me.
Okay, what I was saying was, did it turn off before?
It just did it like.
Okay, I'm not sure if it turned off before I started explaining, but what you want to do is if you want to go through your dictionary and clean up your dictionary, just finding the numbers, you go to dictionary, click it. Usually your main dictionary will pop up right here. If it doesn't, come here, scroll down, find whichever one is your main dictionary, click it. Mine is Dizerati, so let's just say that wasn't right here. Maybe it was Dave. Well, Dizerati is my main. Click it, open it. Then come here, and in your little auto magic keys or whatever, it's going to ask you what you want to do. If you want to add to the dictionary, find an entry, delete stuff, modify, print, export files, you know, it gives you a whole list of what you want to do. Well, what we want to do is find an entry. So you push number 1, and then it gives you different options of what you want to find. Do you want to find everything that's capitalized? Everything that's capitalized will come up, okay? Conflicts, phrases, prefixes, suffixes, speakers. What we want is numbers. So what you push is number 6. And then it gives you everything that has to do with numbers. Everything that has any number in it. And as you can see, I haven't gone through and fixed some of my stuff that has to do with numbers, but you know, that's just kind of the way I write. It comes out right. You know, when you do I-35, I-10, you know, whatever, I mean, it already comes up for me, so I don't have to worry about it. It's already in there, so I don't really worry about it, just because I know that they're together. But you know, like stuff like this, you know, rule 5 should be defined as FI, you know, VE or whatever. But you know, it doesn't really matter. You know, if you have, and you know, we hear this one quite a bit, a Rule 11 agreement. And if you're in court, you're going to hear it all the time, and it has to do with agreements that attorneys come to that's binding. It's a binding contract, or you know, whatever, and it's called a Rule 11 agreement. So I mean, you'll hear that a lot. If you ever sit in court, you'll hear it a lot. You know, especially more probably on the civil side. I don't know about the criminal side or not, but on the civil side, you'll hear a lot. You'll hear it a lot about a Rule 11 agreement. So anyway, that's how you do it. Okay? Any questions about that?
Before we begin to clean up your dictionary to remove old unnecessary number entries, let's make sure that we create a dictionary and user settings backup. In fact, this should be a part of your producing every job. Don't consider any job complete until you've made a backup of your dictionary and user settings. Too many reporters forget to do this and only think about it when their computer crashes. Then they discover that their last backup is from long ago. The process is really quite simple. You'll go to the Tools menu and select Backup. And then you can back up to either an external disk or a folder on your hard drive. Let's see this in action. I'll go to the Tools menu to select Backup. The main dictionary and user settings appear highlighted on this dialog, which should indicate how important they are. Next, I'll select the user settings that I want to back up. If you do not select anything at this screen, then you're not backing up user settings. You can either use the mouse or press the space bar with the arrow key to move up and down and tag files or untag them. Next, where do I want to store the backups? I can store them on a floppy disk, in a backup directory on the hard drive, in an auxiliary directory, for instance a flash drive, or browse to any folder that I have access to. I'll select the auxiliary directory that I've indicated in my user settings. This is the flash drive that I use over and over again. If a file already exists, you'll be asked whether you want to overwrite it or not. And now the backup is complete.
That's a thumb drive.
The Tools menu is also where you will find Restore. In this example, I'm restoring from my auxiliary directory, which is the flash drive that I have plugged into my computer. Next, I'll find the files that I want to restore. That includes my user settings and dictionary and spelling list. And when I press Finish, these files are restored, and I'm asked if I want to overwrite any file that already exists. I'll answer yes. And now the backup is complete.
You just put it on a thumb drive, right?
Yeah.
So he was doing- okay.
You can put it on an external hard drive, a floppy disk if you still use them, you know, any of that stuff. So it's really important, guys, to back this stuff up, because I had my computer crash about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, getting a job out that needed to be in the 4th Court of Appeals the next day, and my computer crashed. You know, luckily I was able to go to Geek Squads, and they were kind of able to help me pull the external hard drive out, pull the hard drive out and put it onto a floppy disk, but it was just the job. That was it. You know, so you have to be really careful and make sure that you back it up. Your dictionary, any of your jobs, any of that stuff. Because if anything ever happens, you've got it backed up. You know, and they can always put it on, or you can always put it on your computer. You know, it's not that big of a deal, but sometimes getting it off the hard drive that's on the computer that crashed, you know, especially if you have like a power surge or something like that, you know, it can ruin all of that stuff. So you want to be really careful, you know, with that. So any questions on that? All right.
Now let's discuss how to set up the Numbers section of your user settings. And the first question is whether you want to use number conversion or not. Now, most users would probably say, well, why wouldn't I? But some writers have done a great deal of work on their number writing theory, and they fear losing control and not getting the quality of number translation to which they're accustomed. But Eclipse number conversion can be very finely adjusted to support your writing style, and you can limit its role to offer you just as much help as you want and no more. So go ahead and put a check in the box next to number conversion, and we'll discuss how to fine-tune the user settings so that Eclipse offers you only as much help as you want. By the way, the dialog that you're seeing here illustrates options that are available on newer versions of Eclipse. So don't be alarmed if your user settings dialog is not identical to the one that I'm using for my illustrations. The next questions ask, how do you write numbers rather than how do you want them transcribed? Do you want the system to ignore written numbers? Perhaps you use word strokes when you want written numbers like 1 through 10. Secondly, do you want the system to process AND as a number? Admittedly, this is just a crutch to help if you can't avoid writing the word AND when you hear it spoken as part of a number. We'll begin with this second question first because it's easier to illustrate. To support this writer, process AND as a number really needs to be checked. You will find 111 items for under $25,125.50. With the number settings incorrectly adjusted, the word AND translates as an ordinary word each time it is written. We'll check the box next to process AND as a number, and we'll write exactly the same phrase. You will find 111 11 items for under $25,125.50. So here you see that the word "and" is being considered part of the number. As soon as I write the period, the number converts for me.
Do you understand what it's saying there
Yes.
about using and
Yes.
and converting it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have mine unclicked. I don't like that.
Because a lot of people write what they hear, which is what you're supposed to do. So, when you write what you hear, this is what happens. So that's why they give you the option of using and as a number or converting and as a number.
If you do ask the system to process "and" as a number, then there will be times when you will need to know how to force a space when the word "and" comes at the end of a number. Let me show you. Here's how a force space stroke would be defined in your dictionary. It's a space surrounded by delete space symbols. So within a single set of braces, you would have a caret, a space, and then another caret. Let's see it used now. The first payment was for $20,005.50, and the next payments were for $5,000 for space and $120. So here I wrote the force space stroke between $5,000 and $120 because these are two separate numbers. If you're wondering why I didn't need the force space stroke after $20,005.50, it's because a number that ends with the word cents is complete. You won't have any digits after the word cents. So you could write the force space stroke, but it's just not necessary there.
Do y'all understand what it's saying right there about that force space? You sure? Okay. Because you need to, if you're going to have that space, you have to have this thing defined. You have to have that defined if it's going to be different numbers. If not, it's going to put $5,120 together because it's going to say, $5,120. But that's not what they were saying. They were saying there's two different things for $5,000 and some for $120. Do you understand? Okay? So the space has to be in there.
I think we've used that before, the SPZ.
Have you?
Is the first.
And if not, then that's how you do it. SPZ, and then that's how you define it, is bracket, caret, space, caret, close bracket. Okay?
Likewise, you don't have to use a force space stroke if there's a comma that separates two words. So she paid $20,000, comma, and $5,125.50 remained. So a force space stroke was necessary to keep these two numbers from being seen as one. But the comma was a natural separator between $20,000 and $5,125.50. So if you're...
Do you understand what it was saying there? The comma kind of works the same way, separating it, but the comma here would have put a comma and 120, so it wouldn't have made sense right there. It would have separated the numbers, but it would have taken away from the meaning of what they were trying to say. So that right here, the comma, which was necessary, separated the two numbers instead of putting them together and using "and" as a number that should have gone with 20,000. Okay?
and $5,125.50. So if you're going to use process and as a number, remember that it's a crutch and it's only in the system if you can't help writing the word and when you hear it as part of a number. So you will need to know how to force a space when the word and comes right at the end of a number, without the word cents or a punctuation mark as a natural separate.
Any questions?
Ignore written numbers is an option that exists on the numbers section of your user settings to give you more manual control over number translation. Let me show you. Let me first illustrate what would happen if this option were not correctly selected. On May 4, 4 out of 5 were purchased. There are obviously not 44 days in the month of May. I used the number bar 4 after the word May. But when I was writing 4 out of 5, I used word strokes. And that's because I intended them to be translating as written out numbers. And here is my dictionary entry for my word stroke 4. It's defined as the written out number 4. So now let's adjust my number conversion settings to give me more manual control. I'll put a check in the box next to Ignore Written Numbers. And now let's go to the part of the dialog that asks what should be written out. Since I will be using word strokes for the numbers 1 through 10, I don't need the system to write out anything for me. I'll use a word stroke where it's appropriate. And what about this option? At start. This is asking, what do I want the system to write out at the start of a sentence? And I'll go ahead and leave this set to 1 through 100. So numbers from 1 through 100 at the start of a sentence would be written out, but 101 and above would appear in digits. So now let me try writing this same sentence again with the number set.
Do you understand what it's saying there? No? Okay, I'll back it up a little bit. Because it's a little bit confusing because, you know, if you wanted to ignore written numbers, then that's what you want to put. So if you do all your numbers like all of your money, like in numbers, then that's fine. All of your dates in your in numbers, that's fine. But if you stroke it out, if you stroke out the numbers, then that's what you want. And that's what I do. I do, you know, when I want, you know, well, they were there for 4 days. Well, it's not the number 4, it's FOUR. So, you know, I know that I want to stroke out FOUR. So I use both my number bank and my written out numbers.
So you leave that one off, you don't mark that.
Yeah, that needs to be marked if you want to ignore written numbers.
Okay,
You know.
that's what you do. You
Yeah.
ignore written numbers.
Yeah. So like on dates and stuff like that, you know, so however you write. So I'm
But
gonna.
if you're doing May 4th or May 4, you don't do a number bar?
I do a number bar.
But if you, like they said, on May 4,
4.
then you do your number?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
do you do a number bar?
I stroke it out, FOUR.
Okay, I'm not sure what I do yet, because I'm too new at this.
Yeah.
So I usually use, if there's a number, it's
And
a number
it's,
bar.
you know, sometimes they're going so fast that sometimes you don't know. Well, there's not 44 days in May anyway.
True, that's true.
But, you know, the computer is only going to do what you tell it to do. Okay? So it's only as smart as you allow it to be. So if you don't hit these or stroke these things or have the right boxes checked, then it's only going to do what it's telling you, what you're telling it to do. Okay?
So if I write all my numbers out, then that's what I need to make sure that's checked. Because I write all my numbers out.
I think you need to leave it unchecked,
Yeah.
I believe. Let me go back and we'll play it.
Settings to give you more manual control over number
I
translation.
think it explains that.
Let me show you. Let me first illustrate what would happen if this option were not correctly selected. On May 4, 4 out of 5 were purchased. There are obviously not 44 days in the month of May. I used the number bar 4 after the word May. But when I was writing 4 out of 5, I used word strokes, and that's because I intended them to be translating as written out numbers. And here is my dictionary entry for my word stroke 4. It's defined as the written out number 4. So now let's adjust my number conversion settings to give me more manual control. I'll put a check in the box next to Ignore Written Numbers. And now let's go to the part of the dialog that asks what should be written out. Since I will be using word strokes for the numbers 1 through 10, I don't need the system to write out anything for me. I'll use...
And that's where you go to also. So if you're going to stroke out, when it asks for write out numbers, that's what it asks you to. So, on write out numbers where you write it out 1 through 10, whatever, then, you would have 1 through 10. If you want your write out numbers to have no values with no numbers, then that's what you want it as. So every time you stroke out a word, then that's what it's going to come out as a stroked out word. Okay?
It's a word stroke where it's appropriate. And what about this option? At start. This is asking, what do I want the system to write out at the start of a sentence? And I'll go ahead and leave this set to 1 through 100. So numbers from 1 through 100 at the start of a sentence would be written out, but 101 and above would appear in digits. So now let me try writing this same sentence again, with the number settings correctly adjusted for my writings.
Do you understand what it's saying there? On this, at the start? So at the start of a sentence, I was always taught that it doesn't matter. You always stroke it out.
You write it out.
Well, not always. Because if they ask you, well, what year did that happen in? 2014.
Okay.
Well, you're not going to write out 2014.
Okay.
So any number over 100 usually kind of works.
Okay.
So 1 to 100, because they'll say, well, how many was it? 100. And you may do 100, 1 HUN for 100. Well, you don't want it to come out as 100. You want it to come out as 1 ONE HUNDRED 100, and then that's what it's saying right there. Okay?
Style. As I rewrite this sentence, notice how my steno strokes that are defined as written out numbers translate almost immediately. They're being totally ignored by the automatic number conversion system. They're just being seen as ordinary words. In contrast, this number, which is not in my dictionary as a written out number, is waiting to see if there is more to be converted. On May 4, 4 out of 5 were purchased. So if you already have a habit of using word strokes when you want written out numbers, but you use the number bar otherwise, then you would have your number conversion section of your user settings adjusted like this. You would have a check in the box next to Ignore Written Numbers, and where it asks what should the system write out, you would answer no values at all. You'll use a word stroke where it's appropriate. Let me add that if you don't use the number bar at all, then do not ask Eclipse to ignore written numbers, because all of your numbers will be word strokes that are defined as written out numbers.
Just ask that. You just asked that. Do not use that ignore written numbers if you stroke it out. If you stroke out all your numbers, okay? So you'll never have to worry about that, okay?
So you wouldn't want the system to ignore them. You do want Eclipse to convert your written out numbers to digits where appropriate. So this option is not for you, but it would be important for another writer. And this is just one more example of how we adjust the software to support the writer instead of requiring the writer to support the software.
Okay, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
StinEd didn't teach us to do 31 that way. Where did that come from? That's just, they just showed me Thrun. Have y'all ever seen that? And what theory is that?
It's probably, and maybe Marx, I don't know.
No.
I think it is StinEd. I think it is.
Ours would be 31.
I'm Kingsbury, and that's not. That's
I've never seen that before.
me either.
I liked it. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Thrun?
Kingsbury's theory is essentially all the numbers 1 through 10, write them out, everything else use the number 1.
But 31.
Yeah.
Thrun.
Oh, he uses the number one? I thought he didn't.
31, you would do 13 asterisk, and it changes it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that was interesting.
Yeah.
Thrun.
That's a good,
I'm
that's a
trying to
good
figure
brief.
out better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But she got her answer right there, right?
Yeah.
Because you do always sort of
Yeah. So you'll never check that box. So if it is checked, which you might want to go in your user settings and check it, you know, to see if it's checked, then you don't want it checked. Okay? Like now.
Why
If
do
you want
do
to.
it now?
Yeah. And go into numbers and see if it's checked.
It's checked.
It is? Then uncheck it. Did you push OK? Because if you didn't push OK, then it won't change it. You got it?
Okay.
All right.
So far, we've been asking questions about how you write numbers, but now we'll ask questions about how you want your numbers transcribed. What kind of numbers do you want translated as digits, and what kind of numbers should be written out? To be more specific, what do you want written out in general, and what do you want written out at the start of a sentence? As you can see, there are a number of choices. We'll illustrate them now. Here's a rather typical number conversion setup. Eclipse is not being asked to ignore written numbers, and quantities from 1 to 10 will be written out. So 11 and above would be in digits, but we'll explore our options. Let's tell the system not to write out anything. Let's see how that would work. I'll write it's 1, 11, 101, and 1001. And here you see that because I had told the system not to write out any values, it didn't matter that I was using a word stroke that was defined as a written out number. Each of these numbers was not written out. It was in pure digits. Now let me go to the opposite extreme.
Do you understand what it's saying there?